"Take off everything," Mountain Man demanded. From the fat girl he bought what he did. Next, made her weep. "Take off everything," the Mountain Man said. "You won't need the rags they chained you in." The crowd gasped, but that was later. First came the auction. Bitter Creek, Wyoming, winter 1883. A cold wind whipped through the town square where debtors were sold like cattle. On the wooden platform stood Mercy Flanagan, 24, broad-shouldered, soft-featured, trembling in iron shackles. Her father's gambling debts had outlived him, and her Uncle Silas was here to collect by selling her. $300 owed, Silas bellowed. "Look at her, strong as two men. Who'll start at $150? Laughter rippled through the crowd. "Too fat to work?" someone jeered. Another shouted, "Feed her to the hogs and call it even." Mercy kept her eyes on the ground, fighting tears that burned worse than the cold. Her stomach turned as the auctioneer's hammer hung above her dignity. Not one decent soul offered a bid, until a deep voice cut through the noise. $300, it said. The square fell silent. Out of the crowd stepped a tall man in a wolf-hide coat, broad as a barn door, snow dusting his beard. Caleb Morrison, a reclusive trapper from Thunder Mountain, known for hauling timber and living alone since his wife's death. He counted out crisp bills on the table without a word. "Sold," Silas barked, too eager to question it. The shackles came off with a clatter. Mercy staggered, half from disbelief, half from relief. Caleb offered a steadying hand, but said nothing more. When the wagon started toward the mountains, Mercy dared to ask, "What will you do with me?" His answer was quiet, unreadable. "What's fair? You'll work until the debt's repaid." And under his breath, almost to himself, "Then you'll be free." The wagon creaked up the frozen trail, wheels biting into snow that shone like crushed glass beneath the moon. Mercy sat stiffly on the wooden seat beside the stranger who had just bought her life. Every jolt of the road sent pain through her wrists where the shackles had rubbed her raw. Caleb Morrison hadn't spoken since they left town. The lantern between them swung with each turn, lighting his weathered face in flashes, the high cheekbones, the scar near his temple, the pale blue eyes that looked more like winter sky than human warmth. He held the reins with the patience of a man used to silence. Mercy pulled her shawl tighter, ashamed of the smell of iron and fear clinging to her clothes. "Why did you buy me?" she asked finally, her voice barely audible over the wind. Caleb didn't look at her. "Because no one else would, and because no one deserved to." "That's not an answer." He flicked the reins lightly. "It's the only one you'll get tonight." They rode through the darkness until the faint outline of a cabin appeared, a sturdy timber-built house with smoke curling from its chimney. 2 horses nickered in the corral, and light glowed from inside like a promise of warmth. When they stepped through the door, Mercy stopped short. The room was large, clean, and quiet. A roaring fire danced in the stone hearth. Wooden shelves lined the walls, stacked neatly with tools, furs, and jars of preserved food. It looked nothing like the cold, cruel place she expected. Caleb pointed toward a wooden tub filled with steaming water. "You need to wash. Your clothes are filthy, and I won't have sickness in my house." Mercy froze, fear rising again. "Wash? Here?" He nodded. "There's soap on the table, towels by the fire. I'll bring you clean clothes." She backed away instinctively. "You mean to watch?" Caleb turned, his gaze sharp but calm. "No, ma'am. I mean to keep you alive. You've been standing in the cold half a day, and if you don't warm up soon, you'll lose more than your pride." Then, without another word, he walked outside and shut the door. Army hospital, retired. Why retire? His jaw tightened. Because I failed the one patient who mattered most. The silence between them was heavy, but not unkind. B looked away, tracing the beams of the ceiling. "Then why did you save me?" "Because I still can," he said simply. Days passed. The pain in her back dulled to a throb, but every movement reminded her how close she'd come to never walking again. Elijah tended to her with steady discipline, changing bandages, mixing poultices, making her drink bitter medicine he brewed from herbs and whiskey. He spoke little, but when he did, every word felt deliberate. "Your body is strong," he told her one morning while examining the wound. "It wants to heal. You just have to let it." B managed a weak smile. "You sound like you're talking about yourself." He didn't deny it. No man had ever treated her with such quiet decency, not even her kin. She clutched the clothes to her chest, whispering, "Thank you?" Caleb only nodded. "Eat something after you dress. There's stew on the stove." Then he walked out again, leaving her alone with the firelight and the strange feeling that, for the first time in her life, she wasn't property. She was a person. The following morning, the mountain air bit at Mercy's cheeks as she stepped outside. Frost glistened on the pines, and smoke from the cabin chimney drifted upward into a pale blue sky. Caleb was already at work by the woodpile, his axe rising and falling in a steady rhythm that matched the heartbeat of the wilderness itself. Mercy stood in the doorway, wrapped in Sarah's flannel dress, still too loose at the shoulders. The fire inside the cabin had left her warm for the first time in months, but something else, something quieter, was stirring inside her. Gratitude, suspicion, hope, maybe. "You can come closer," Caleb called without turning. "Cold'll bite through those walls soon enough." Mercy hesitated, then stepped out into the snow, boots crunching beneath her. Caleb split another log and leaned the axe against the stump. "I'll be heading to the ridge this afternoon," he said. "Need to check the trap lines. You can come if you got the strength." Mercy blinked in surprise. "You want me to go with you?" "You'll freeze if you sit still all day, and you might as well see the land you're working for." She almost smiled at that. "Working for," he'd said, "not owned by." The trail up Thunder Mountain was narrow and steep, but Caleb slowed his pace so she could keep up. The snow came to her knees in places, and more than once he reached out a steadying hand to help her over fallen branches or icy stones. He never lingered, never looked at her the way men in town used to. His touch was steady, practical, and yet something about it felt safe. "You live here all alone?" she asked between breaths. "3 winters now," Caleb said, "since Sarah passed." "I'm sorry," she murmured. "So am I." They continued in silence until they reached a ridge overlooking the valley. Below them, Bitter Creek looked like a toy town, tiny, cold, far away. Caleb crouched to check one of his traps, releasing a fox that had been caught but still alive. He murmured something to it, gentle words, then let it go. Mercy watched, astonished. "You let it live?" "It wasn't meant for it," he said simply. "A man's got to take what he needs, not what he can." Mercy nodded, her heart tightening in a way she didn't understand. By midday, they stopped by a frozen stream to eat. Caleb handed her a strip of jerky and a tin cup of coffee. She took them gratefully, though the bitter drink burned her throat. "Why me?" she asked suddenly. "You could have bought any man to help with your land, someone strong, Someone. Someone not you? He finished for her, looking straight at her now. Mercy flushed. That's not what I meant. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. I didn't buy you for strength. I bought you because no one else saw what you're worth. Thought maybe, if someone just gave you a fair start, you might see it yourself. Her eyes burned, tears freezing before they could fall. You don't even know me. I didn't know Sarah either once, he said quietly, but she became my whole life. People surprise you, Mercy, if you let them. The name, her name, sounded different in his voice, softer, real. They returned to the cabin before dusk. As Caleb lit the lamps and Mercy stirred the stew, a small, comfortable silence filled the space between them. When she caught him watching her from across the table, he didn't look away. Outside, the wind howled down the ridge. Inside, two wounded souls shared a meal, neither quite ready to call it peace, but both beginning to believe it might be possible. And for the first time, Mercy didn't dread tomorrow. The mountain winter settled deep and slow. Days blurred into quiet rhythms, chopping wood, mending clothes, boiling stew, feeding the hens that huddled against the cold. The cabin on Thunder Ridge became its own little world, isolated but alive, filled with the sounds of fire crackling and the smell of pine smoke curling through the rafters. Mercy rose before dawn each morning to stoke the hearth. At first, she did it out of obligation. After all, she was here to work off her debt. But soon she found herself doing it because she wanted to, because she liked the way Caleb's face softened in the firelight when he woke to warmth instead of cold. He was a man of few words, but everything about him spoke in gestures, the way he fixed the hinges on the barn door so she wouldn't struggle to open it, the way he quietly placed her gloves by the fire to warm before she went outside, the way he always made sure her bowl was filled before he served himself. One evening, after they finished supper, Caleb leaned back in his chair and watched her fold laundry by the fire. "You've got a steady hand," he said. "Sarah used to say that meant a person's got a steady heart." Mercy smiled faintly. She must have been kind. "She was," he said softly, staring into the flames. "Kind enough to make a fool like me think I was worth something." Mercy's throat tightened. She'd be proud of the man you still are. Caleb looked at her then, really looked. "You sound awful sure of that." "I am," she said simply. Outside, the wind moaned through the pines. Inside, the fire popped and hissed like it was listening. As the weeks passed, Mercy began to fill the cabin with touches of life that had long been missing. She hung dried lavender above the window, scrubbed the floor until it gleamed, and even sang softly while she worked, old Irish tunes her mother had taught her. Caleb pretended not to notice, but every time her voice floated through the room, he found his hand stilling over whatever task he was doing. One afternoon, she caught him standing outside the door, listening. "Don't stop," he said quickly when she fell silent. "It's been a long time since this place sounded like home." Mercy turned pink, but she kept singing. That night, when snow fell heavy enough to bury the fence posts, the two of them sat close to the hearth, sharing the same blanket without realizing it. Caleb spoke first. "I've been thinking." "About what?" "Your debt. You've worked more than enough to pay it." Mercy looked up sharply. "You mean I'm free?" He nodded. "Free to leave whenever you want." The words hit harder than she expected. Freedom, something she'd dreamed of her entire life, now sat heavy in her chest. "Do you want me to go?" she asked quietly. Caleb's eyes softened. "I want you to do what feels right." Mercy turned to the window. Snow pressed against the glass, blanketing the world outside. "I don't know where I'd go," she whispered. "Every place I've been, people only ever saw what I looked like, not who I am." Caleb leaned forward. "Then maybe it's time you stayed somewhere that sees both." The silence between them was warm now, not empty, the kind that hums with the things no one dares say out loud. That night, before she went to her room, Mercy paused by the door. "Good night, Caleb," she said softly. He looked up from the fire. "Good night, Mercy." When she closed the door, her heart was racing, because, for the first time, the word home didn't sound like a lie. The thaw came slow that year. By March, the snow on Thunder Ridge began to melt in uneven patches, leaving behind dark soil and the first timid sprouts of spring. Mercy was outside hanging laundry when she heard the sound of hooves on the frozen trail, a sound that didn't belong to Caleb's horse. Her heart tightened. Few people ever came this far up the mountain. When the rider appeared at the edge of the clearing, Mercy's blood turned cold. It was Silas Flanagan, her uncle, the man who had sold her like livestock. He swung down from his horse with the swagger of someone who still believed he owned her. "Well, well," Silas sneered, spitting into the snow, "if it isn't my runaway niece. You've been busy, haven't you? Living high up here with your mountain man?" Mercy stepped back toward the cabin door. "You've no right to be here." He laughed, a cruel, hollow sound. "Oh, I've every right. Sheriff says you never paid your full debt. With interest and fines, I reckon you owe me another $200. "That's a lie," she snapped, voice shaking. "Paperwork says otherwise." Silas waved a crumpled sheet. "Signed and stamped." Before she could answer, the cabin door opened. Caleb stepped out, his face calm, but his eyes cold as river ice. "You're trespassing." Silas's grin faltered. "Just came for what's mine." "She's not yours," Caleb said evenly. "Not now. Not ever. I paid her debt in full. Got a receipt from the auction house." "Receipt don't mean nothing when I've got the sheriff on my side," Silas spat. "You think they'll take her word, or yours, over mine? Folks in town know what she is." Mercy flinched at the word what, not who. Caleb took a slow step forward. "You best ride back down that hill before you learn what happens to men who come here talking like that." Silas reached for his revolver, but Caleb's hand was faster. In a blur, he drew his own gun, cocked it, and aimed squarely at Silas's chest. The two men stood locked in silence, wind whipping between them. "You wouldn't shoot me," Silas sneered. "Try me," Caleb said, voice steady as stone. Mercy's pulse thundered. "Please, Caleb, don't." Caleb didn't lower the gun, but his tone softened. "Go back to town, Silas. I'll bring proof of payment tomorrow. You show your face here again, you'll leave in the ground." Silas's lip curled. He spat once more into the snow, then mounted his horse. "This ain't over, Morrison. Town's got no place for thieves and whores." When he rode off, Mercy crumpled where she stood. Caleb holstered his weapon and caught her before she fell. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never wanted him to find us." "You got nothing to be sorry for," Caleb said quietly. "He's the one who'll regret riding up here." That night, she couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The memories clawed at her, the laughter of the townsfolk, the chains on her wrists, Silas's cruel grin. Caleb sat across from her, the lamplight flickering between them. "He can't touch you now, Mercy. Not legally, not any other way. Tomorrow I'll go down to the sheriff myself." Her eyes filled with tears. "Why would you risk that for me? He could ruin your name in town." Caleb leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Because no one's going to take what's mine to protect? Not while I'm breathing." Mercy's breath caught. He didn't say the words lightly, and she knew it. But even as warmth spread through her chest, fear lingered. Because she understood one thing. In places like Bitter Creek, truth didn't matter. Power did. And Silas still had plenty of that down the mountain. Outside, the wind howled again through the pines, carrying with it the promise of a reckoning. 2 days later, the stillness of the mountain broke once more. The sound of hooves thundered up the frozen trail, not one horse this time, but 3. Caleb, who had been repairing the fence, dropped his hammer and looked up. "They're back," he muttered. Mercy stood at the cabin window, heart pounding. Down the slope came Silas, the sheriff of Bitter Creek, and another man she didn't recognize. A wiry deputy with cold eyes and a hand resting on his holster. Caleb wiped his hands on his coat and stepped outside before they could reach the porch. "You'd best state your business quick," he said evenly. The sheriff, a stocky man with a gray mustache, lifted a folded piece of paper. "We've got a warrant, Morrison. Says here this woman belongs to Silas Flanagan until her debt's cleared." Caleb's jaw tightened. "That paper's forged." "Maybe," the sheriff said, "but I enforce what's in front of me." Mercy came to the doorway, her face pale, but her voice steady. "That's not true. Caleb paid every cent. I saw it." Silas smirked. "You're in no position to talk, girl. Best pack your things. You're coming home." Caleb stepped between them, his frame a solid wall. "She's not going anywhere." The deputy's hand twitched toward his gun, but Caleb didn't move. His voice was low, controlled. "You draw that iron, son, and you won't live long enough to regret it." The sheriff hesitated. "Now, let's not do something foolish." But Mercy moved forward, surprising them all. She stood beside Caleb, chin raised, fire blazing in her eyes. "You all called me worthless," she said, her voice shaking, but loud enough to carry over the wind. "A debt, a burden. But I've worked, I've earned, and I've lived with more honesty than any of you ever showed me." She turned to the sheriff. "You can take me back in chains if you want. But know this, if you do, you'll be taking me from the only man who's ever treated me like a person. And I'd rather die on this mountain than live another day under Silas's cruelty." The sheriff stared at her for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. Then slowly he lowered the warrant. "I don't see any debt here," he said. "Looks like paid property to me." Silas's face twisted with rage. "You can't just—" "I can," the sheriff interrupted. "Now ride home, Silas, before this turns into something ugly." For a long second, no one moved. Then Silas spat into the snow again, turned his horse, and disappeared down the ridge. The deputy followed. The sheriff tipped his hat to Caleb and Mercy before leaving. When they were alone, Mercy's knees gave out. Caleb caught her, steadying her with strong arms. "It's over," he whispered. "You're safe now." She looked up at him, tears glistening in her eyes. "You stood between me and the world?" He smiled faintly. "No, Mercy. You stood on your own. I just happened to be beside you." Outside, the last of the snow began to melt, and sunlight spilled through the clouds. For the first spring came early that year. The mountain streams thawed, running bright and wild again, and the air carried the scent of pine and wet earth. Inside the cabin, warmth lingered, not just from the hearth, but from something deeper that had taken root between them. Mercy moved easily through her chores now, humming softly as she kneaded bread or hung laundry beneath the eaves. Caleb watched her sometimes from the doorway, arms crossed, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He had bought her once to pay off a debt, but somewhere along the way he had found something far rarer, a reason to live again. That evening they sat together on the porch as the sun sank behind the ridge. The sky blazed gold and violet, the kind of beauty that could make a hard man quiet. "You ever think about leaving this place?" Caleb asked softly. Mercy shook her head. "No, this mountain gave me back my life. I'm not leaving her." He turned to look at her, the fading light catching the edges of her hair. "Then maybe you ought to make it official." She frowned. "Official?" Caleb reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, rough-carved wooden box. Inside lay a simple silver ring. "You don't owe me anything any more, Mercy," he said, "but if you'd stay as my wife, that'd be worth more than all the gold in Wyoming." Her breath caught. For a moment the world fell silent except for the wind in the pines. Then she smiled through her tears. "I'll stay, Caleb, not because I owe you, but because I finally know what home feels like." He slipped the ring onto her finger. The firelight from the cabin spilled over them both, warm and steady, like the beginning of forever. And that's how Mercy Flanagan, the girl they once mocked and sold like property, became Mercy Morrison, the woman who built her own kingdom on Thunder Ridge. Sometimes the command that once sounded cruel, "Take off everything," wasn't about shame at all. It was about shedding the past, the pain, and everything that kept her small. If you're still listening somewhere in the world tonight, remember this. Love doesn't always rescue you softly. Sometimes it demands you to stand up, start over, and claim your worth.